Well, I spent 10 years in the military, 3 years of which were infantry, and the remaining time was aircraft life sport fitter, working on helicopters up in Townsville.
You got into the Army. Why? What attracted you?
I've always been interested in the Army and the armed forces. I don't know the answer to that why, but ever since I was a boy, I've always been interested in military. I mean, my mum and dad stopped us from using toy guns, so my brother and I just picked up sticks that looked like weapons and kept playing anyway. So it's just something I've always been affiliated with. I don't know why.
Your 10-year career in the Army took you to different places. What were some of the highlights, and where were some of the places you were involved with?
Okay, 2004, I was in Qatar. I was there for about 4 months, and we were there in support of the operations in Iraq. In 2006, I went to East Timor, and I was there for 3 months, and we were there helping re-establish the country after it sort of collapsed for the second time. And then in 2008, I went to Afghanistan in Kandahar for 5 months.
And what were your roles during all this?
Predominantly aircraft life support fitter, so supporting aircraft that were supporting troops on the ground.
And when you were doing these jobs, did you feel under threat all the time? Was there a nervous energy, something could happen?
Definitely in Afghanistan. I actually enjoyed Afghanistan because I went to Qatar and I was awarded the Australian Active Service Medal, and I did not feel that I earned it. We were never under any threat. We were in a holiday camp, as far as I was concerned. And when I went to Afghanistan, I feel like I actually earned that medal for the first time. We were fired upon with indirect fire once every week for about 5 months with rockets and mortars and all sorts of stuff. Having said that, I want to make it very clear that we were in the background, and our Australian infantry and special forces and support elements of those two were up the front and in direct contact with the enemy. They were in much greater danger than we ever were. But yes, we were in danger.
Keith, you talk about and reflect on the Army life. What is the most appealing part to you about your life in the military?
I'll start off by saying I love the Army. The thing I like most about the Army is the lifestyle and the comradeship, but in particular, that most people in the military are stand-up, straight up and down people. What you see is what you get. When I went across to the civilian world, it's a bit of a blurry grey. People aren't what they seem. They often wear masks, and you have to really work to find out who they actually are as a person, whereas you don't need to work anywhere as hard as the military. What you see is what you get more often than not.
And during the last few years involved with paramedics, has that given you another insight into life itself?
Definitely. I love my job, and you certainly get to spend time with people in their worst and greatest life events. And it's certainly life-changing, yeah.
ABC Wide Base, sitting down speaking to author Keith McArdle, talking about and reflecting on his life in the Army. So after 10 years, Keith, you're back in civilian life, and I believe you're looking to get back into it again.
Definitely, Rick. Yep, I'm having a good crack, and I can't wait to get back in.
Has that made you a better person, having the break? Do you think you'll be a better soldier because of it?
I suppose it's a difficult question to answer. I believe so. I think I've got more life experience now with 8 years of paramedicine under my belt. But I suppose you don't really know until we actually go and have a crack. Yeah, we'll find out.
Keith, this is the third book you've written. Did you get inspiration from direct service that you're involved with?
Yes. Now, the Australian Defence Force will never, ever openly admit that Indonesia is a direct threat to our national security, but a lot of our training is directed towards the fact that a threat is, if there is going to be a threat, it's going to come from the north. I'll put it that way.
Keith, let's get back to your love of books, because you're pretty good at English at school. You did English Lit. When did it strike you that you had the ability to write books?
I just thought I'd give it a go one day, and I absolutely stuffed it up, and that particular manuscript will never ever see the light of day. But it's certainly been a learning process on a steep learning curve, and I've loved every minute of it.
When you're writing, these stories obviously have a feel because they're Army related. Are all your books in the future going to be related this way?
My first book I ever wrote was actually called Tour to Midgard, and it's about an Australian Special Air Service patrol in Iraq who trigger a time portal and end up back in 10th century Viking Denmark. That was one book that was a bit off tack. The next book I'm writing is actually dark fantasy, or grimdark. It will have military orientations, but not contemporary in any way.
And when you think back on your books, do you think there's room for improvement? I speak to a lot of authors, and they're always reflecting back on the book what they could have or should have done.
Definitely. And that's always why professional editors and manuscript appraisals are so important. They tell you where you've done something well, where you've done something not so well, what you could have done, what you should do, and how to improve it. There's always room for improvement, and if you don't think there is, I think you're doing something wrong, and you're doing yourself a disservice as well.
Keith, you're saying you're involved with some organisation that helps especially for people like yourself getting into the writing game and helping them build their craft?
Yeah, that's called the Australian Manuscript Appraisal Agency. So you basically pay them, and they send your manuscript away to professionals, more often than not, who are involved in the publishing industry at the moment. Look at your manuscript and look at the character, the pacing, the structure, the language, put all that together and look at and give you a report, a 3 or 4 page report on what they think could be improved and whether it's a viable product for the current market at the moment.
Keith, you put out 3 books. Is it getting easier as you go along?
Definitely, yep. For sure. So I've now got into a stage where my roster is 4 days on, 4 days off. And in the 4 days off, I always write between 500 and 1,000 words per day, no matter what. And that's got me into a routine of writing now, and I'm finding that much easier.
It's amazing. We speak to so many different authors that have so many different styles and disciplines. And for you, even if you're not up to speed, you're not feeling that's the day, you still push yourself to do those a certain amount of words?
I think Stephen King said it best. He said, amateurs write, and I'm not saying I'm a professional, but this is Stephen King saying this. He said, amateurs write whenever the need sort of provokes them, whereas we professionals get up and go to work.
Interesting analogy. Tell us about this particular book, The Essence of Havoc.
Havoc is the 3rd book in the Unforeseen series. So the first 2 books focus on the Indonesian invasion of Australia. So it's more about fighting the Indonesians and trying to recover our country. The 3rd book, finally, the ANZUS Treaty is invoked. Some other world partners come to help as well, and they push Indonesia, by and large, out of Australia, apart from a large force that's pushed out into Western Australia. That's a side issue. The main issue in Havoc is that resupply is now being flown in 3 times a week into Brisbane, and you're starting to see some grubby Australians trying to get their paws on the supply lines, and they do it very, very well. So Havoc is about Australian soldiers trying to help out the law by stopping these attacks on the supply lines, and also on a second, there's 2 parts. That's the first part of the book, and the second part is Ethan Lewis and his specialist team are sent into Indonesia to capture the Indonesian president, and that goes completely to custard, and they end up outnumbered and surrounded.
Well, Keith, you've got the elements there, you've got the war, you've got the people, you've got some failure. We've even talking about some rotten custard, but well done. And congratulations on the book, and congratulations on a great career.
Thanks so much, Rick.